Right, hi, welcome to this Open Security Summit session in January 2021. We have a very good friend of mine, Jeremiah Grossman, coming all the way from the US. He'll tell us where in a second. And this is it's quite an interesting session because, I've been sent a couple of good questions, and Jeremiah has been doing security for a long time, actually more than me, and has some very interesting views, and he has a great success story. And if there's somebody that I highly recommend people to listen to and understand is him. So this is a great way for us to learn from him and to explore some interesting and maybe some controversial topics in security, right? So Jeremiah, you want to just give a quick introduction about you?
Sure. First, Dinis, thank you for inviting me. Looks like there's somebody in the waiting room.
Yeah, I've let him in.
Okay. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for the warm introduction. Actually, I think people should listen to you every bit as much as me. I mean, you've been around a long time. One of the preeminent community builders out there, evangelist for Absec. So Absec has been a passion of mine since the very beginning. So we butted heads a number of times, but we're always for the cause of software security and the betterment of the world. So I always appreciated that about you. So thank you.
Cool.
So my background, so I've been doing high-tech technology for as soon as I could type, maybe since I was 12, programming since I was 12. And but it wasn't until I landed a job at Yahoo when I think I was like 21 or something like that in the early 2000s. No, in 2000, just after Y2K, I landed a job at Yahoo, which might have been one of the first web security jobs that ever existed.
Yes.
And that's where I got my start at Yahoo and hacking Yahoo websites, and took what I learned there and started a company called White Hat Security that brought DAST and SAST to the world. And that grew really, really big, and that has since been acquired. So I got to work with OAuth experts all over the world. I got to speak. So I think I've done it all in Absec.
Yeah. So that was my first question, right? What do you think is the current state of Absec in 2020?
I think there's two perspectives. One is, if you have point of reference on where we were back in, let's say 2000, you can go to any website on any search field and find a cross-site scripting vulnerability everywhere, let alone type in a single quote and a semicolon and find SQL injection everywhere. Mm-hmm. If we take that as a point of reference, we've come a long way. We're in a much better place than where we were. Now people know the words cross-site scripting and SQL injection, and you know what? People tend to fix them when you let them know about it. So that's a good place. At the same time, if we look from where we are today and all the stats moving forward, we can be doing much better. If you look at all the statistic reports, industry reports, and how companies get hacked, still maybe half the time it's through a web application. So I think we're dealing with a lot of legacy software. We still got a long way to go. We have a long way to go to fix all the legacy software from 20 years of the web that we built. And the new software that gets created is much better than what it used to be, but it's far cry from what we would consider safe, secure, where we can sleep at night. So that's what you and I get paid to do.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that you failed to mention, right, is that you also were very involved as a blogger, and you're also very involved in security research, yep. Right? So going a little bit back to memory lane, right? What was one of the most spectacular vulnerability that you discovered?
Let's say if you break down web security into halves, there is the security of all the web applications on the server, and there's the security of all the web application code in the browser. My specialty was always client-side, JavaScript, cross-site scripting, and things like that. So I loved exploring all the different quirks in the browser and the way it could work. So, one of the people that found the color trick with the visited links, finding like your surf history in the browser by checking the link color. So that was a cool one back in the old days. What we called, I think it's hard to prove, but I might have been one of the originators of cross-site scripting. We just didn't call it at the time because that's how the web worked.
Yeah, exactly right.
Cross-site scripting wasn't a vulnerability until they added cross-site restrictions for frames.
It was a feature, right?
It was a feature, and then also like, wait a minute, it's a vul now, because they made it a vuln by adding a security feature in the browser. So that was kind of neat. Then there was cross-site, there was intranet hacking where you can point the browser at intranet websites. There was clickjacking, which is, still around, today. But lots and lots, my favorites are always the browser-based vulnerabilities, messing around with ad networks. I did like the server-side stuff, but I just like messing with web browsers the most. I don't know why.
Yeah. So going back to your other point of where we are, do you think the web browsers are better today?
I think they fixed a lot of stuff. They are a lot better. That one's really, really hard. Okay, let's say we take the point of reference. If you come to a website that I control, can I hack your machine underneath? No, probably not. From that perspective, the browsers have come a long way with, with all their memory handling, the sandboxing, and all that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. If we talk about the attacks that stay within the browser walls, the ones that, de-anonymize you, leak your browser history, cross-site request forgery, cross-site scripting, steal your cookies and all that stuff. Nah, not so much. All that stuff is still very, very possible. It might take a little bit more effort now, but not all that much. All those are still there. And those can't really be fixed the way the system works because it's advertising vendors who give us our web browsers. And to fix those vulnerabilities, they would actually have to make the browser private, which is exactly what the advertisers don't want. Yeah. So actually, in many ways, I kind of gave up working with the browser vendors because they had a conflict of interest. They don't want to make the browser secure from websites revealing information about the user. They don't want that.
Yeah. Well, you were one of the guys that used to buy that fight quite a lot, right? You used to buy a lot of the fight with the browsers and saying, look, your business model is ads. Here we are trying to protect against something that your business model actually is trying to allow, right?
Yeah, and that's I ran into tons of it. They were good people trying to do good work. It was them who were butting heads with their own business model. They wanted to fix the vulnerabilities that myself and others were finding, but the business that they were working for didn't want to. So it's not to say that they were bad actors. They wanted to, but it was a conflict of interest with the business model. So that's why it was short-lived, but I tried to make my own web browser to solve these issues, but there was a business model issue with that. But that's why today, my favorite web browser is Brave that solves a lot of these particular issues and doesn't have the same conflict of interest. It still has some of the same vulnerabilities and exposed to the same attacks. But as far as a business model preventing security and privacy, way, way better. So I always tell everybody to use Brave.
Yeah. And that's actually a topic I want to come back with later, but I feel that the economic model of security more and more is absolutely critical to solve the problem, right? Even with the best intentions, if the economic model doesn't point, right, to security, right, or doesn't reward good security practices, then, we have a problem, right?
That is my thesis right now for why a lot of things don't get fixed and why we haven't made a lot more improvements. It is terribly correct. Those that are in the best interest to make a security impact have no incentive to do so. If we ask ourselves, let's say we look at all the breaches, the last decade of breaches, with rare exception. Well, let's just ask ourselves, the last 10 years of breaches, what attack impressed us? Where we looked at the attack technique and said, dang, well, that went right past us. We have no way. We don't know how to fix that one. We don't know how to defend ourselves. With the rare exception, it's just not the case. We know how to prevent each and every one of these things. Strong passwords, prepared statements for SQL, all sorts of things. We know how to fix each and every one of these things. So why don't we? One, it's either we don't want to fix it or it's too expensive to fix. But predominantly, it's just a conflict of interest. Those in the best interest to protect the data have no incentive to do so. And if we don't fix that,
I would argue that it's also the same thing inside companies, right? So I've worked now on the, it's interesting because I was a long time on the researcher side, on the exploit side, and I went, and I think I waited a while to get into management. But when I went to management, I started to the defense side, right? And it's very interesting to suddenly have the responsibility, right? But it's very, and being a CISO and having, in a way to see like the levers you have, but also see almost what is the points of attrition. So I would say even inside businesses, you have the same challenge, right? It's like, it's almost like I felt after a while that I'm basically making the business case for the business to change, right? And it's very hard when there's not a lot of good data points. So there's not a lot of good levers that you can basically, pin your argument.
It's exactly right. So the way I always looked at it in Absec is if I show you a vulnerability in your website, you have a choice. You can fix it now, or you can fix it later or never. And the business has a choice because they have limited resources. You either spend your resources fixing a vulnerability that might get exploited and might cost you money, or you focus those resources on a revenue generating feature that if you don't ship, will for a fact cost the company money. And which one do you do when? And we have to make those decisions all the time, whether we like it or not, with incomplete information. So this is the question that breaks the brain of the security professional. Because we're buried in vulnerabilities currently. Yep. Which vulnerabilities should we never, ever fix?
Yep.
Which is the opposite way of saying, because if you don't answer that question, you're then in the position of saying we should fix all vulnerabilities at all times, which is just not possible. Yeah. So we need some kind of risk management model, a financial model to figure out what vulnerabilities to fix when. I also like looking at the idea of how do we make vulnerabilities cheaper and faster to fix, because then the decisions get easier.
Yep. So what risk framework do you use? What's a good risk framework that you've seen? Actually, maybe the two questions. Which one do you use and which one have you seen working really well?
I haven't seen any of them working really, really well. I think it depends on the business. I've heard people have had good success with FAIR, some with the CVE or the CVSS rating systems. I think your mileage varies, and every business has different levers. Some have to fix issues by law or by regulation. Some the customers bring up. It's very difficult to have a very blanket standard. For the companies that I run and tend to run, I always deal with highly sensitive information. So when a vulnerability gets known to us, we try to fix it as fast as possible, because one exploit of one vulnerability in the companies that I run could be disaster for the entire company. And if I have to spend, pull a team off for a day, a week, or whatever, and spend $10,000 fixing it, it's better than losing the entire business. So the businesses that I run tend to be extremely risk averse, but I'm not about to tell anybody else how to run their business that can play fast and loose. And like a social network, if a social network tried to build, super secure, super private software from the beginning, they would probably fail as a business. So it's hard for me to tell them otherwise.
But even in your business, you have to have a threshold, right? There is, there's a point where you go, okay, above here is we fix straight away. But then you get into the kind of, okay, this one we'll fix as soon as we can. And then is that line that this one's we're not going to fix.
It's one of the reasons it's so difficult to answer, because we don't even know what a digital asset is worth right now. If you just pick the average website, what is it worth? What is it worth to the business? What do they first teach us in InfoSec school? Find what it is that you're meant to protect, figure out how much it's worth, and what it's vulnerable to. Yeah. We conveniently skip the first two and hand wave around it. We don't know what it is that we're protecting, and we have no idea what it's worth. So how do we possibly, in a CFO kind of sense, do risk modeling when we don't even know how to value things yet? So I spend a lot of time with CFOs trying to understand this.
But that's a business problem, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And the thing that I think for me was a big epiphany was, and I realized that, in most of security, security is almost the canary in a coal mine, right? Like we almost, like, if you pay attention, it's like you said, we see it coming, right? We'll be the ones that are poking the thing. We're the ones that, crash things, bring things down, find ways to exploit, find almost the blind spots of both, in a way, technology problems, but actually business problems, right? Because we exploit things, exploiting the business function, right? And when you go beyond almost sometimes the technical vulnerability, and I found it's a challenge, because when is a technical vulnerability, it's very easy for us, right? And we got sometimes the really cool exploits, and it's very easy to show the damage, right? And the need to. The challenge is when we're really now touching on business vulnerabilities or vulnerabilities within the business that you can't fix unless you fix the business.
You have a conflict of interest in the business model, and that's very hard to deal with. Maybe you deal with anti-fraud or thresholds and things like that. Rate limiters. Some of the questions that I won't say pain me, but interest me today is if you look at all the Absec statistics reports over the last, well, even the most recent ones, remediation rates, what are they, like 50%, with a half-life of like 6 to 12 months? Fine, that's, let's say we're slow in fixing vulnerabilities. Why don't the other ones get exploited?
Yep.
Is it because they're not really vulnerabilities? Is because they're not really threats to the business? Are we just that much better than the average adversary? Why don't they get exploited?
So look, I thought a lot about that, man. I remember sometimes we finish an assessment, right? And then there was no logical explanation. Well, there is one for the things not to have been exploited before, if there was enough attackers, right? It was like, you got to the point where you're going, man, okay, there's a couple that you find that you go, yeah, you need to know what you're doing, or maybe a couple of ones that you needed to know the code and stuff like that. But there's others where you go, man, this was like there for the taking, right? So, and I think after a while, the two conclusions I got, right, is, first of all, the number of real attackers is not that high, right? When the way we talk about it. And the second one is we are dependent on the business model of the attacker. So a lot of vulnerabilities, you can have an insane vulnerability, but if there is no business model to exploit it, either you fall into the sort of ideology attacker, right, who want to cause damage, and they'll do it, right? But again, by definition, they don't tend to be very, almost, not mature, but very evolved, because when they get evolved, they realize they can make a lot more money than whatever ideology they were doing, right? So they even if they started with ideology, they'll morph very quickly to the financial model, right? But then you're depending on the financial model of the attacker, right? And if the attacker doesn't have a good way to exploit, right, or to make money, then the commercial value of that vulnerability is not that high.
Exactly right. We have an issue that we have a difficult time figuring out what the likelihood of exploitation by an adversary is. It's very, very difficult. The web is like something like 1.4 billion websites. How many attackers could they possibly be? If every one of them was vulnerable to something, they'd have to be each individually exploited, or a lot of them would be. So there's probably just not enough attackers to go after all of it. So, one of the concepts that have come out, I've talked to some people about it, but I think our industry, what do we spend? 120 some $billion annually on InfoSec for everybody to get hacked all the time anyway. Yeah. I actually think, if we doubled our spend, would we reduce the breaches by 50%? I don't think so. I think in many ways our industry has gotten to peak prevention, where we're getting diminishing returns on preventing a breach. And I think now where the focus should be is, sure, do prevention as best you possibly can, but you can't get perfection. No one's asking us to. But what we can at least do is, when we get hacked, when a crime has been committed against us, we should notice when that happens, perhaps the day or the week of, rather than 6 months to a year. And I think if we do that, a hack that was noticed in a day would have little to no bearing on the business. Yep. In the case of, let's say, Equifax, as it's a favorite example, if an Equifax hacker broke in, but they were detected and kicked off the system in a day or a week, do we even talk about that as a story? Do they suffer $200+ million in damages? Probably not. It's only when we give them 6 months to a year in the system or more where we have a lot of damage. So I think there's a lot more gains to be made in InfoSec, not necessarily in prevention, but at fast detection and response. And that's one of the things that Absec really hasn't done yet. We focus a lot on prevention, making the software secure from the beginning, but not helping adjacent systems figure out when the software has been misused, exploited, to raise its hand and say somebody's bad's on the system. And I think there's a lot to be done there.
And that goes to your point of knowing what to fix, what not to fix.
Yeah.
Every time you fix something, you're spending valuable resources that maybe you could be used somewhere else.
Exactly right. And it might be better. And that's why, and we don't have good answers for this. Should we fix this vulnerability? Should we not? How much should we spend? So when the CFO, those who give us money to do this work, asking, what do I get for the money that I give you? We have a really difficult time as an industry responding. We're like, we always need 10% more to do, whatever the vendor booths at RSA say. It stands to reason why no one outside of our industry listens to us, really, because we don't have useful answers. We don't have a good ROI model. If I'll reduce your risk by X% if you give me this amount of money. Like, we don't have good answers for that yet. In our defense, we're techies. We come out of programmer school. We speak TCP/IP. We're not used to Excel spreadsheets and EBITDA business models. We don't speak their language yet. So if you notice, the next generation I see of security professionals that are very good have an equal balance of technical skills and business savvy. Some of the best CISOs out there are true risk managers. They're not as deep tech. They're not going to do buffer overflows and SQL injection and stuff, but they don't have to. They're going to try to put some dollars and cents behind it.
Well, I had to learn very fast what EBIT that was, man.
It's just an accounting term for standards of like audit and reporting.
I know, but I have to say that I really liked when I got to that world where I saw risk very differently. In fact, some of my first major clashes were with risk teams, right? Because I was coming from a completely different planet, right? For them, and I feel that I'm trying to solve that problem by automating and connecting risk, by putting risk almost at the center of everything we do. So we can answer that question, which is, what's the ROI of doing this versus doing that, right? Like, how do you measure this activity versus that activity? And I really like the way you're saying about, making sure that the impact is not big, because I got to the point where I would open a vulnerability or a risk higher for not being able to detect a problem than from the problem in the first place. Yeah. Right? Because if somebody tells you, here's a vulnerability in your website, my question was, A, why didn't we detect it before them? B, show me everything they did. And if we can't even answer the second question, when I give you on a plate what they did, right? And then we have bigger problems, right? We have bigger problems of understanding. But and this goes to the heart then of the challenge, which is the business doesn't understand it. Right. So it's like, it's like fixing things, right? Nobody will say, I don't fix this because I don't want to fix things, right? Everybody says, I don't fix this because I don't understand the side effects of change. And you asking me to change stuff. And I much prefer to leave it over there, because at the moment, based on the current traffic patterns and based on the current activities, it's all nice. So I don't want to freaking touch that thing, right? Because it's been running for a while. But the problem is that actually that's a massive risk, because it means that you don't fully control your infrastructure, your environment.
So the answers to the questions that we're answering, I was, talking about a long time ago, you were too. And the answers I thought could come out of InfoSec, but I wasn't waiting for it. And if you remember back in 2015, 2016, I started talking about cyber insurance and where the industry was headed. Yeah. And I took a lot of heat for that one. And slowly over time, I'm being proved right. Cyber insurance, where a lot of these answers are going to come, it's already starting to happen, where the insurance companies are going to starting to tell us, the security professionals, how much to spend and what to do and when. And what's worse than that for us is that they're going to be right, because they're going to have the actuarial data, the data we would only dream of having. They're going to have a cross section of knowledge on how the attacks occurred, what was exploited, who the adversary was, and the resulting business impact. They'll know everything. And then they'll be able to use their actuarial models, just like everything from arson to automotive crashes, and be able to provide this data to us. So I know everybody doesn't like to hear it, but I actually think InfoSec becomes the home inspectors of the computing industry. I think that's what we become over time.
I think it's a bit more than that, but I feel that you are completely right on the insurance, right? And I remember having a conversation with the insurance guys and saying, look, I really, where's your cybersecurity team, right? Where's your Absec team, right? Because you should be driving these things. And then realizing that they didn't have, and I said, look, let's talk in 3 years from now, right? But you are spot on, because the insurance, if you think about it, is the typical thing, right? Either I fix things, or one of the ways to not fix and reduce risk is to insure it. And if I have a good amount to insure it, I can then know. The challenge is that in most organizations, that even the business doesn't know the value of it, right? Or they don't know the value of that system, right? But the insurance will bring a level of objectivity and data analysis, which I think is absolutely critical for our industry.
And they're in the position to make a difference, because they are holding the bag. When there's a loss, they take the loss, and it's in their best interest to not take losses. So to tell you the controls that you would need to do. So they're going to be right more often than not. So
where I think the cybersecurity, the InfoSec professional, or even the security industry, right, My view is that we should have a seat at the table, not because of security, but because of visibility. If you look at security, right? Security is the only department, is the only team in the whole company that can talk to everybody. So yes, although insurance has a lot of data, if you look at the data that we can have from a security point of view is massive. We go all the way from the business, all the way as deep as you can go. So I actually got to the point where there's a correlation between a team that does a great job at development and a team that can fix things. Literally, there's almost a one-to-one mapping there.
So that visibility is right. So you're actually seeing a lot of the leading edge cyber insurers, they're getting telemetry data directly from their clients all the time. Yeah. So when they see an RDP port open on their client's network, they're responding to the CEO and the security team saying, "Hey, go fix that." You know, so you're actually seeing that happen already because it's in their best interest to do so.
But that's a security team should be the other way around, right? The security team, if anything, it should be a minus point on insurance if the insurance has to tell the company that they have an issue, right?
The way the market dynamics work, that can't happen yet. So what'll happen is if the insurance company can't make you do anything, if there's a breach and a loss to something they told you about, likely they'll still pay out on the loss, even pay out on the breach, even if they told you ahead of time what the problem was. What will happen the next time around, where it's highly likely, is they're not going to cover you the next year, and you're going to be without a provider. And who's going to want to provide a policy post breach? So that's that will come up first.
So a question we just have here from Abbas is: so do you know that cybersecurity insurance get cheaper if a business is compliant with some auditing, compliances like SOC 2, right? Like, for example,
is the question, does it, or does it
at the moment?
So I've worked with a number of cyber insurers. I've seen a number of policies. I've actually gone to their websites and tried with the different radio buttons, like PCI compliant, not PCI compliant, Windows, not Windows, and everything. Yeah. I've never found where compliance to anything changes your premiums. Predominantly, there's only three things that substantively change your premiums: the industry that you're in, the amount of revenue that you do, and the number of records you have, let's say in terms of private information that you have. Your actual security posture for most cyber insurers matters very little.
But that's the problem, right? But that will change, right? So if you look at the maturity of the insurance business, the day where that more security equals less premiums, right, is the day that we now have a positive model for security.
When the insurance industry starts to normalize, yes, but I think we're at least 3 to 5 years out from that. Because we're also dealing with, just as we talked about a bit ago, a sentient adversary. A sentient adversary will exploit a hardened company, for the most part, just as quickly as a not hardened company. From the insurer's perspective, a loss is a loss. They don't care if the customer or the client was really secure or not secure. It's just the losses that matter. So they don't have to care so much about the relative security of the company. What they seem to care more about is the fast detection and response, the DFIR stuff, because that's where the losses are. It's not the breach, it's the losses that cost them.
We go to the time to detection, right?
That matter. When it comes to dollar losses, that seems to matter more than anything.
Yeah.
So, but to answer the question, the relative security posture doesn't matter yet. It will, just not yet.
Yeah, not yet. But also what we need is also micro insurance, right? So in a way, like I don't want one insurance, because when you look at the business, a business doesn't have, any business of a certain size doesn't have one platform, one system, one thing. You almost need to have different premiums almost for different parts of the business that actually at the security, we can pass the cost to those guys and say, hey, because of the insecure state of your infrastructure, we're paying a bigger premium because of that. And this team over here, they got their act together. They tick all these boxes. They got all this stuff. Their time to exploit is very low. We have very little premiums from those guys.
Well, we're going to get there, but don't yet give the insurance industry too much credit for their sophistication. One is they're not technologically that sophisticated, and their data models can't do that yet. They don't have enough data. It will come, just not yet. That's why you see mostly blanket cyber policies for the large companies or the smaller companies. but it'll get there. It'll just take time.
But that's why I don't think, unfortunately, that these solutions are going to come from the insurance business. I think they have the opportunity, but for that to happen, we would need a lot of those companies to start to almost be the biggest hires of cybersecurity expertise. Like if we saw those companies buying security companies, then you could see they went in the right direction, right?
That already happened.
It's starting to. They did a lot more.
What was it? Who bought Straws? Straws Freeburg. I forget what big insurance company bought Straws, but they've already been buying it. And, I've talked to the AIG people, probably one of the best cyber teams. Yeah. If you look real close at a lot of our colleagues, when you say security must have a seat at the table, the way that's happening is cyber insurance is hiring InfoSec to go work in insurance. And that's where you're seeing a lot of our colleagues go to that have the experience. Yeah. And I remember talking with the dynamics probably changed a little bit of AIG, but I remember talking to like their 7 or 8 person cyber team, and they were introducing themselves, and we had a nice conversation. The first 30 minutes in, I was like, they were using some very sophisticated language, like InfoSec language, like they knew what they were talking about. And I kind of like, time out, like all stop. Who are you guys? Like, you're an insurance company. You're not supposed to be this smart. And they went, and they were all InfoSec transplants except the one data guy, the one quant. He was from insurance. Everybody else was InfoSec transplants. Yeah. They knew the technology, they knew the lingo. They just they didn't have the background in math and data science, so they brought that guy from insurance.
Yeah. So if you go back to the discovery concept, right, which I actually think is very close to your heart, right? Because in White Hat, you guys basically were hacking, your customers left, right, and center, right? And now, your latest company, right, Big Discovery, right? My understanding is that your job is to discover what's out there and then help companies to manage that, right? The kind of game of the visibility is absolutely fundamental to reduce that attack surface, right? To allow people to understand what's going on in real time, right?
The number one question I got from customers, yes, we would find vulnerabilities in their websites, and we're really good at it, is we want you to scan or assess all of our websites. And no companies had a list of all of their websites. It was the strangest thing, unless you're buried in it every day. Most companies don't have an inventory. They don't have an attack surface map of everything. Turns out to be a really hard problem, which is why no one has solved it and no one does it. So at that point, I had been in InfoSec for 15 years. And I was thinking, if I want to stay in it some amount of time longer, I want to tackle another really large, important problem. And that was attack surface management to solve this one problem. A lot of, at that point, I had been trying it with colleagues of mine for at least 5 years at that time, failing every single way. It was a very tricky problem. So Robert R. Snake Hansen, you know him well. I've been working with him for a while. I say, I usually give him like these crazy ideas, and sometimes he takes me seriously. So I go, so Robert, what really helped fix this problem? If we just had a copy of the internet, if we had a copy of the internet, we would know everything was there. We could draw a circle around what a company owns. And we both had a laugh about it. And like, I swear 2 or 3 years later, he comes back and goes, okay, I did it. What did you do? He goes, I got like a copy of the internet. Sort of. It's like I have everything Google doesn't have. I was like, what are you talking about? So what we did was, and what Robert did was, is we took every data set we can get our hands on, the entire web, crawl database, whois, passive DNS data, port scanning data, everything we can get our hands on about the entirety of the internet, and put it in one spot. We in so many words, had a copy of the internet, every domain name, every DNS entry, all the metadata about everything. And we're like, oh, we could do asset inventory now. We can do attack surface management. We just need a tech to go, we can type in Honda or Toyota or pick a company and go, those are all their assets. So no more on-demand scanning. And at that point, we were ready to productize and had a company. So that's how we went about it.
So on that model, right? So do you now you have the ability, right, to know what's out there, right? What's kind of exposed that you can reach, right? In the kind of in a linkable way. Can you also take feeds, right, from what happens inside? So for example, do you go to, if I give you my AWS credentials that has read-write privileges to, for example, an environment, can you go in there, crawl all of it, right? And then actually allow, in a way, add a lot more metadata to your set?
The quick answer is no. The way the industry breaks down right now, there's the tax service management people that focus on everything that's externally facing, and there's other vendors that look at everything that's internally facing. And right now, no one does both. It's very reminiscent of Absec vulnerability assessment, where you have the DAS people and you have the static analysis people. And it took a lot of time for the same companies to do both. That's where we're at in that space now, because the tech is so different. The tech to do DAST has nothing to do with the tech to do SAST. Same thing in the asset inventory world. At some point, you'll like this problem here. Let me give you a really tough problem. If I tell you the fully qualified host name and an IP address of something, you tell me what the internal IP address is and do the mapping. It ends up being incredibly difficult to do it at scale. That will come eventually, and extracting more metadata and that big picture will come. Right now we're first step of the industry. It's just what websites do you own and what countries are they in? So
the way are we kind of tackling that and a lot of the problems here. So I'm very big into graphs, right? And maps and stuff like that. So for me, that's a graph problem, right? And I actually would say that, as a company, and it's interesting because I feel that I'm now in a very interesting Goldilocks situation where the company is big enough to have a decent amount of problems, but it's not big enough that everything is massive, right? Everything is like, you have so many things that are happening that you can't even tackle some of those realistically. So that's actually a problem that I want to tackle, right? Which is exactly those connections, right? And exactly that understanding of, if here's an asset, right, what links to that asset and what links to that asset. And you're right, it's a tough problem because you hit a load balancer and the load balancer proxies to that guy, and then that guy connects to that one. And then, and that machine only exists for a couple of hours, right? And then suddenly it's like, whatever that IP existed, actually the thing behind it, right, is not there, right, after a while, right? So it is an interesting problem, but I'm actually approaching it from an engineering problem. So I'm actually, kind of redirecting how we do, where we basically are almost selling the whole flow has an app, right? So that means that the whole setup, instead of being some almost freaking multi-layer hacked away sculpture, right, which it tends to be most architectures, right? And after a while, and then half the guys leave and nobody even knows how the whole thing is freaking glued together, right? I'm actually trying to create this environment where even our, big applications are all on demand, right? It takes a lot of engineering effort, but it forces you to tackle that problem, right? It forces you to suddenly understand how does everything connect and how is everything, is actually fit together, right?
Classic Dinis Cruz, always like 3 to 5 years ahead of where everybody else is. Right now, everybody is like with a Koala scanner just wants to scan everything, but they don't know what everything is. So I just got to drop, like, that's all people are, and Dinis wants to do this whole flow chart and like microservices and where it goes.
Well, the key is to make it commercially viable, right? So what's interesting, and that's why more and more I'm kind of realizing that, if you don't change the economic model, right? It's interesting, even when you control engineering, right? Even when you control the teams, right? There's attrition unless the business model goes in a direction, right? Unless, and I actually think that the cost is a great interesting model, right? Because the more we get visibility into costs, the more you start to say, companies are leaving so much money on the table because they don't understand what the hell's going on, right? And then suddenly that becomes, a motivator, right? In terms of what's there.
It's funny when that actually comes up a lot in attack surface management, where we go, we go ask the company, how many websites or how many things online do you think you have? They'll say 1,000. We go, no, you have more like 2,000 to 3,000. And they're like, what? And then we give them the list and they go, what is that? What is that? What is that? Oh my God, that's online. And a lot of times they experience cost savings just by turning random things off that they're paying for no reason. Right. Somebody spun it up. It's an old legacy system. No one really uses it. No one should be using it. Just turn it off.
I remember asking CFO, can we get the money back for the stuff that we turned off? And he was like, yeah, good luck. Yeah, good attempt.
It's funny. A lot of the work then that we do in InfoSec is janitorial in nature, just cleaning up stuff that shouldn't be there.
But I think we should embrace that, right? I actually think that there is a lot of value in it, right? And especially if you connect the side effects of that. Because remember that the fact that server was abandoned, it's actually a massive vulnerability. It's almost like not the server, but the fact that nobody noticed. Yeah. And what it means that if you get compromised on that machine, guess which is the machine that nobody paying attention to? Yeah. Guess what's the machine that can now stay in the compromised hands for months and months and months until the attackers make a mistake, right?
It's a plain technological governance problem. Like, how did this thing get built by someone and built by a team, money spent by a team, and then forgotten about? And then how are we allowed to spend so much money on this over time where no one notices it? Like, no one noticed the audit wasn't there. Like, it's both a technical and a financial governance control problem that you're exposing. And this is where every company is at. So no one needs to be necessarily embarrassed by it, because company has this problem. So that's why I like going after this problem, because it's one that everybody had. And the first step is, here's everything you got, and where do we go from here?
So here's an interesting for you, right? I think it was you, and I remember other people noticing that although a lot of security guys will say, oh, you need to invest in security because the share price goes down, right? And then there was us who go, actually, a lot of companies, even if you have a little blip, right, it goes up, right? There isn't a correlation for a while. But what's interesting, I think, in the last couple of years, you are starting to see correlation, between serious, compromises and, and stock price. And a good example was, for example, in the SolarWinds attack, which I want to go back in a bit, but I actually noticed that, for example, FireEye was a good example. That FireEye stock went down, but because they responded really well, because they got their act together really well, and they were almost a leading voice in what was going on, and they were not, of course, the root of the problem, their stock price went a lot up, whereas SolarWinds stock, it keeps going down. There was a little blip, which I thought people were going, oh, maybe this is the time to buy again, but it's come down again.
Actually, I think that's a very interesting case study that for us to pull apart. I think 99 times out of 100, you can buy the breach. People have an initial visceral reaction when a breach occurs. The stock dips. When it dips, buy it, because it's going to go back up predominantly. It'll recover within a few weeks to a few months. It almost always does. So you can actually make money on that blip. I'm not a financial advisor. Don't invest based upon my guidance, please. But that does happen. Now, with respect to FireEye took a lot of heat and their stock dropped. And then now it's trading at a 52-week high. I don't think that has anything to do with how they responded, good, bad, or otherwise. I think it had to do with this particular breach, and the number of victims that are out there caused them a lot of work and to generate a lot more money. This breach was not going to cost them any customers in any reality. It was only going to make them money. So they could have responded callously or whatever else, but they were just going to make a lot more money. SolarWinds, on the other hand, I thought it would tank much harder. I was right on my estimation about FireEye, but not SolarWinds. I thought SolarWinds, I still think so, could drop much, much lower if customers decide to dump them. They're still trading well above a 52-week high if we look at it. They might have responded poorly, but imagine what it takes to remove SolarWinds in favor of one of their competitors. The switching cost is real high. Yeah. So any downstream effect could be way out there, way out for them. So we'll see what happens, but I don't think how a company responds really has much to do with anything.
But there's one interesting element in SolarWinds, which they're now being sued by the shareholders, right? And I haven't saw all the details, but the ones I saw was that they were arguing that SolarWinds did not disclose enough of what was going on, right? And I think they just hired the guy, Curbs on Security, whatever, which they hired a really good guy, right? But it does raise some interesting questions on if you sit on vulnerabilities or you sit on insecure sort of setups and you don't invest as much as maybe you should, right? Are you buying that liability in the future?
Yeah, I mean, all we're really talking about is how much more is SolarWinds going to lose as a result of the lawsuit, and who's going to pay for those losses? Is it the company or is it their insurance provider? I'm not quite sure if SolarWinds had cyber insurance, but if they had cyber insurance, all these legal expenses will be paid for by the insurer, and it won't impact the business at all. Mm-hmm. That's what happened to Equifax. Equifax had at least 100 to 200 million in cyber insurance. They exceeded their cyber insurance policy, but that's why it didn't have a major impact on the business. They were insured.
Mm-hmm. But then that goes to the idea of how do we change the business model, right? How do we get companies to actually do the right thing, right? And
the one thing I would like to see is, I've been talking about this forever, but everybody resists this idea, including the technologists, and that is software security liability, software liability in general. All the software that everybody makes comes with a big warranty disclaimer. No warranty, no liability for everything. So we can say whatever we want, but any of the software that we write said no warranty, no liability if you get hacked. It's basically, we have a whole technological garage sale where all sales are final. Until we get around that, we're not going to have accountability. And why does the EULA get to disclaim all liability? Why does it get to do that? So that's why I took it upon myself over the last 10 years to help companies sell on the basis of security, develop optional warranties for customers, like at White Hat. If we promise you won't get hacked if you fix the vulnerabilities that we say, we would warranty our service. There's $120 billion flowing for InfoSec, and with very rare exception, no one's warrantying everything and anything. No one knows if any of this stuff works, and if they think it does, no one's willing to bet on it. So I've helped a dozen companies so far develop warranties, but I think that idea has to go to software. Customers need to demand warranties for their software from vendors. When that happens, we'll get more secure, because those in the best position to make a difference, the software makers, will make a better and more secure product, because it'll be their pocketbooks impacted and not us.
Yeah. No, that will make a big difference, right? Because now the incentives will be much more aligned. Although you still can be backed by insurance, right? But then the insurance can be a lot more objective, right? Because then having insecure pipelines or insecure development life cycles or leaving certain vulnerabilities there, you adding up to that potential of a massive now breach, right? Or a massive liability, right? And then what I like about that is it also, especially on software developers, it removes that externality that is the other player that has to make it secure. Regardless of the fact that we make the vendor makes it really hard to be secure, there is a way to be secure if you do the right thing and have the right visibility and you have the right stuff, but almost the defaults become insecure, right? Or it defaults to an insecure state.
So I think this concept will come. It's hard to know what will stimulate it or when. I don't really want it to come about through governmental regulation, but it might have to. But in the meantime, I think it should be a voluntary market force. I'm looking at two relatively similar products. One's offering me a security warranty and the other one doesn't. Which one do I want to buy? Is the premium worth it? And I think that concept could fit well in this market. When enough businesses are breached because of shoddy software, I mean, look at how much security we have to add to band-aid the crappy technology that we purchase. I mean, that's essentially what we're doing. We have entire armies of patch management software people and processes to fix the crappy software that we buy. Imagine if we didn't have to do that. Yeah,
and actually that goes to that point that security, we are, the janitors is probably a too harsh word, but we are clean, sometimes you clean up the mess or you figure out what's wrong, right? But actually you go into the heart of the problem, which is it's actually the software that is the problem, right? Yeah. The problem is, and I would say is the engineering, right? That is the problem. But the reality is most companies don't take engineering seriously, right? If you look at the food chain of engineering, right? In most companies, engineering is almost a function to support other parts of the business who have a lot more, weight and a lot more decision. And engineering is almost like, here's a problem. You guys go and figure it out. Oh, you want a bit of budget? How much is it? I'll take half of it and off you go, right? Or maybe you take a third, a 2/3 if you complain too much, right? But if you had that liability, right, and that's, those assurance, then it would be quite different, right?
And you can see these externalities in the ecosystem. What is it, every 5-6 years or so, we get a brand new software development framework and a programming language because no one wants to use the previous junk that's untenable anymore. That's
Exactly.
why we do it. It's just, how many times do we have to recode the clock? You know, like,
Yeah. So what question for you, right? So if that model, software liability, right, which basically changes the economic model, right, of software development, how would that work with small business? How would that operate? And then how would that work for open source? Let's start with small.
Yeah, I think let's start with small businesses and software liability. Does it create a barrier to entry? Actually, I think it's the exact opposite. I've only helped small businesses, reasonably sized businesses do this because it's not something the bigger companies wanted to do. So let's say you're a customer trying to buy a security product or any technology product from a company. One's a relatively smaller one and one's a behemoth, but they both look relatively the same, but you're not exactly comfortable by working with a small company. But the small company says, you know what, I'll guarantee the security of this product. If it doesn't work, I will cover your losses. And yes, I'm a small company, but I have a big insurance company standing behind me. The act of a security warranty could actually be a market benefit to help them sell over a bigger, larger player. That's been my experience at the dozen companies that I've helped out so far. So that's the first one. The second one, with respect to open source in and of itself would have a really difficult time with software warranties. And so I think this is where the commercial players could have an advantage over open source. Open source eats, commercial software's lunch eventually. Eventually, any commercial product that's successful gets eaten up by open source. It gets commoditized by open source. That happens every single time. I just, wish there was an open source product that, killed Exchange. That would be really good. But that aside, I think if the commercial entities want to really have an advantage over open source, it'd be by voluntarily offering software warranties.
Well, or I guess the other option there, right, is to see the evolution of the current business models around providing support and actually then liability on top of open source. Forget like the Red Hat fundamentally provided, a curated version of open source. So I actually think we might actually get the two worlds, right? We actually get more and more, in a way, we want to have the code of what the hell is running in our system. More and more, you almost want now to have third parties who confirm the validity and the authenticity of that code. Now, whether it's the same company or a third-party company, but that become a very valid business model, right, for companies to do.
It could be. I see no reason why that couldn't work. At least it should be tried.
Yeah, but then addresses the commercialization, right, and so the business model of that, which is really powerful.
Well, so again, just to have the mock example, there's a commercial product that does X and an open source product that's managed by company Y, relatively the same product, but one is open source and it comes with a warranty. The business might go, that might sway the business decision on which one do you do, commercial or open source. Yeah. And then imagine from a CFO's perspective, I'm spending how much on what product, and if it fails, these guys will cover the losses. That could be attractive.
Yep. Although the challenge there is understanding exactly what the warranty will do, right?
Oh yeah, just like any other warranty, whether it's on your car, your toaster, or whatever.
But that can come to regulation, right? So that's the kind of thing that governments can do, right? Or entities can do, because they can force almost the concept of warranty, like we have today, right, in electronic goods, right?
I think it depends on the geography and on the industry. There are standards for insurance. The insurance industry likes standardization of insurance policies. They like that stuff. So I expect it to standardize over time.
Yep. Cool. Actually, one of the guys just put a nice link on there for Harvard Review article on cyber insurance, right? All right, another question for you, right? Could the advent of COVID-19 and the massive transition to international bodies of corporations, physical to online, actually, lead to more things of cyber terrorism, right? In this case, right? As we go, more, physical to online.
more cyber terrorism. We'd have to define the term cyber terrorism, to the operative word, to be terrorized, loss of life, that sort of thing. I think we are going to see that anyway. It's just the nature of the world that we live in. I don't think we needed COVID for that. I don't think COVID changed anything. I think COVID just sped everything up that was already going to happen. It brought everything forward. And since it sped it up, it made it so that we're not really ready for it. So more and more lives are going digital. Can I make a doctor appointment without access to the internet? Will my car work if I lose internet access? Does my refrigerator work? And all those sorts of things. Are all those opportunities for terrorism, all those and more? Absolutely. So will we see more? Yeah, I don't see why not. It's just how big and how bad could it possibly get? And those are the difficult questions to answer.
Well, a SolarWinds attack with malicious intent, right?
I don't know if that was cyber terrorism as much as could have been. That's where the definitions will matter. Was that, nation state sponsored, was that intellectual property? Was that for money? What was that for? They were trying to hide themselves. There's no loss of life that I'm aware of.
No. What I'm saying is, imagine somebody or an entity with access that what they had, right? Either for Bitcoin mining, right? It's either if they decide to mine Bitcoin, do ransomware or do destruction actions, right? That would have been I think that would have been the incident that would have changed our industry for good. But
we've had loss of life as a result of cyber attacks. Didn't change a whole lot. Ransomware directly has caused loss of life. It's slowed down emergency services and things like that. Hasn't been enough yet. Hasn't been enough. So that's why, like, when they ask the question, are we going to see more instances of cyber terrorism? Yeah, sure. But that's easy because I'm only predicting the present. We did.
Yeah, but the question is, where's going to be that incident that is going to really tip the scale for us, even as a society, to realize software is out of control and we really need to do something about it?
That's a really good question. That's a prediction I couldn't even possibly make with any kind of, I have no idea how bad it could get. What I am pretty sure about is in no one's best interest to drop the internet. I don't know if there's any particular party with the ability to do so that wants to turn the internet off. So we at least have that going for us.
But I think in terms of the damage to society, we passed the point where dropping the internet is the worst that can happen, right? Ironically, dropping the internet might not be a bad thing because it might stop other things from occurring. Right? These days, given the interconnectivity of the whole thing, right? But there was a time where, I remember the joke I used to say is like, you go to Black Hat or DEF CON, you pick 10 people in random, right? Or 15, you sit them around the room and you say, if you were really annoyed with the internet and in your world, could you cause serious damage, right? Yeah. And you got a number of people going, yeah, I could do that. But they wouldn't do it, right? And then you go to that other question of, if there is so many people that technically could do it, that it hasn't happened, then again, what does that tell you, right?
No one really wants to. It's in no one's best interest. No nation state wants to do it. No cyber criminal wants to do it. Like, no hacktivists want to do it. They wanted to face your website and put graffiti on it. They don't want to kill the internet.
Exactly, right? So,
I mean, how would they use Snapchat?
But I think that's where, that's kind of what caused the problem now, is that I feel that we measure our security almost by the ceiling of the damage caused, not by what could happen. Yeah. And for a while, I remember thinking that if a number of security researchers just dropped, right, on the public, every vulnerability that they know, the market would change overnight because everybody realized that this is a massive epidemic, right? And it's systemic. But because everything is damage control, right, and is getting worse bit by bit by bit, we never fully realize how exposed we are and how close we are to massive issues, right?
I think you need to give the market more credit and the financiers more credit. If you look at who owns a large portion of InfoSec now, it's all the private equity guys. The private equity people have been buying up a ton of companies. They own a lot of them. InfoSec is a big industry and it still grows by 7% a year. That's a massive amount of growth at that particular size. Yeah. So there is massive investments being made and big exits. I mean, look at the size of these new security companies and look what their market cap is. There's lots of dollars flowing in this area.
Oh yeah, no, there's a lot of money these days, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So.
Which actually means that, it's time to mature, right? But now almost like we have the horsepower to actually start to tackle these problems in a proper way, right?
Well, there's the things that we can make and sell that'll make money, and there's the things that'll make an impact. Those are not the same thing.
Well, look, you have a whole business that is based on just even discovering what exists, right? Still at that level, right?
Hey, at least half of what I found got fixed. I know that much.
So let's go to a topic that I know you're also quite passionate about, which is education, right? So I know that one of the things we talked about OWASP that you always wanted was other OWASP to be a big sort of education kind of element, right? So what's kind of your advice for new joiners to the kind of sort of the Absec industry, the people who are joining in, and what's the best way to learn, right? And this doesn't need to be young people. This could be, skills transfer, right? Which I actually think is a good side effect of COVID that is dramatically augmented the talent pool, right, that we have available.
So there's the advice I would give to everyday people that want to get into Absec, and there's the advice I would give to OWASP as an organization. It's two very different things. I get to mentor a lot of new aspiring InfoSec experts, some young, some not so young. And, if they're passionate enough, this space is for them. This Absec, there's no shortage of things that they can do, places they contribute, and jobs they can get hired for. But I like the adage, you could be a builder of secure systems, breaker of secure systems, or defender of secure systems. Builder, breaker, defender. I like that adage a lot. And I'm a breaker, heart and soul. Like, you don't want me managing your firewall, or anything like that. I'll break stuff. You probably don't want me coding the next generation anything, but I like breaking stuff. And there's a role for that. So, it's pick your stereotype and invest yourself in it wherever you think you can. Now, what White Hat did a really good job at is provide an entry level jobs into the AppSec industry, where we train lots and lots of people on how to break software, break web applications. But it was a very rare company in that way. And the AppSec industry, InfoSec in general, has a very difficult time onboarding new people and skilling them up. AppSec is no different. I asked OWASP, but it never went anywhere, a long time ago, to do certifications to compete in that market, very much like ISC Squared did, because an AppSec expert needs to both learn things and articulate to a hiring manager that they know things. They need a certification. Mm-hmm. So OWASP could own the knowledge base of information that what an application security person of different levels, types, shapes, and sizes could or should be, and let other people do the testing and the training and create an ecosystem around that. OWASP, if nothing else, is a huge body, unparalleled of knowledge. It should be that and leverage that for the benefit of the community, and let others train to the knowledge that OWASP says. And I think that would help out a lot of people. It would help out the organization, it would help out newcomers. It would help out, those that are doing training and certifications. I think it would do a lot, and it would really grow the organization. And because right now, if OWASP, it was always struggling for dollars, because, just like ISC Squared, you have to pay to keep your certification up. I think that would be a useful business model for OWASP, but didn't happen. They like making money on conferences instead.
So on that one, what do you think of a certification model based on open questions and answers?
You can't do if you look at the standardization body, I'm forgetting the name, behind ISC Squared, you can't do that. There's like a regulation that says there has to be the questions have to be secret, maintained by a secret group of people, not a secret group of people, but a closed group of people who can't ever be certified. That's what's interesting about it. The knowledge base or the question bank has to be done by experts who can never be certified.
Okay, but go with the analogy, right? So if you had enough questions, right, on AppSec, right? So if I gave you 500 questions on AppSec, right, and the questions were well written and peer reviewed by experts, right? So for example, like I can write a question, right, on, let's say, the difference between cross-site scripting and cross-site request forgery, and then multiple valued answers, that only somebody that understands the difference can answer the correct one. Right? you know, and there's an art to writing good questions, right? If you have enough of those, like my argument would be that almost by, you know, unless you have a photographic memory, and if you have a photographic memory, you can pass any exam anyway, right? But for most humans taking that, right, they will have to learn it, right? It doesn't matter if the questions and answers are public, right? Like when I took the driving test in Portugal, right, you know, every answer was public, right? I had a book, right, that had every single answer. And then on the driving test, they just asked me 20, you know, significant statistic questions about what I was supposed to do to know, right?
I think let's say you're 100% right. There's no way I'm going to argue with you on it because you might actually be right. What I'm saying is that as a business model for OS to adopt, there's a standardization for certifications that's at least respected in the US that you just have to abide with. You may not agree with it, you may not like it, but that's the way it's set up, the way ISC Squared does it and everybody else does it. So it's either you have to change that standard or exist outside that standard. That's all I'm saying.
Look, but I agree with you. And that's why part of the conversation never went forward, because you had one camp that said certifications have to be done, but they have to be closed. I would argue that you can't do that in an OWASP environment, because even through the fluidity of it, every question had to be open. And then the crowd would go, well, but you know, then you won't be a certification as those standards say. And I said, who cares? What matters is actually what you just said, was, is the people hiring, are you raising the bar of an industry? And if you're raising the bar of an industry, if you're making people more knowledgeable, and that cert is actually recognized by the hiring people, who cares that the hiring the cert standards are still stuck in the past?
There's just one reason for that, is because there's testing facilities, there's generic testing facilities all around the US that standardize. You give them a body of questions to test students on, and that's the standard that they go by. If you say you're not going to adhere to that standard, then you don't get to use those testing facilities, and it makes it really hard to test people to give them the certification. It's a logistics problem. It's not a conceptual problem.
Yeah, there's a nice startup, right? Waiting to be started, right? Solving that.
Yeah, it's hard to get that much momentum. But either way, OS didn't do certifications. It's 2020. What's slowing it down?
I know. So what other recommendations do you have for OS?
I think just that one. I just think we need, there's a lot of openings. There's a lot of need for people. It's just that one. If I want just one thing, do standardization. You can get all the competing interests to align. You really can. I strongly believe that, because it'll help people get entry-level starts into Absec and to prove that they know what they know to the hiring managers. Because that's the #1 issue with hiring managers, is there's a person that says they know Absec. How do I know? I'm not an Absec expert. And even I can be an Absec expert, right? I'm specialized in browser security. If I talk to you, Dinis, if I didn't know you, I have no idea of what you're talking about. You're going to talk to me about microservices and static analysis. I don't know. And that's the trouble, is that hiring managers will have. They need to be able to outsource and trust that someone else has vetted them.
Yeah, that I agree. And actually, now maybe on a topic that you also were involved with, like with crowdsourcing, because I know you were involved with background. I think you still are involved with background, right? So those were one of the first guys to also be involved in the whole crowdsourcing, right, world.
The reason I knew that crowdsourcing was not necessarily going to take over, but it was going to end up in our space. So what I was doing at White Hat was just like many others, where we would do an assessment on a website. We would find vulnerabilities and we would get paid a fee. You did this work too. And no matter how many vulnerabilities we found, we basically got paid the same amount. So here's how it worked, at least at White Hat. We would find, let's say, 100 vulnerabilities in this website over a given year, and the customer would pay us X. They would fix those issues. We would test again over the next year and maybe find 50. We would find half as many vulns and get paid the same amount. You start doing the division and the efficiency went down, because they were paying for effort, not results. The following year, they might have had 10 or even 0 vulnerabilities, but they're saying the same amount. And so the vulns per dollar metric, the vulns started to get per vuln found, and that model started to get really expensive. As time went on, as websites get more secure, systems get more secure, it lends itself to a bug bounty model where you crowdsource it, where you're not paying for effort, you're paying for results. So the most secure systems end up being the best candidates for the crowdsourcing model. So once I saw how the market dynamics were going, I was like, okay, I either have to do this bug bounty stuff at White Hat, or I have to get involved with the company that was doing it. At that exact same moment, Casey Ellis, the founder and the time CEO of BugCrowd, started BugCrowd, and I gave Casey a call. He's like a friend of mine. And I was like, you didn't just start a company that I wanted to start, right? And so that was our collaboration.
Cool. So on the topic also, but actually, what's your views on using that talent, right? On that kind of crowdsourcing, and even like the next generation of going and finding talent on demand, right? Oh. That gets paid by results, right?
Oh, it's huge. I mean, it opens up a worldwide market. You can see, well, not only the results for the website and the owner are really, really good, because the bigger teams always win on a pen test. It always works that way. But then you can spot the really good people that are really good at doing things that you can strike up a relationship with. And a lot of them end up just getting full-time jobs at the companies that they've been testing. I think it's huge to hone your skills. I mean, most of us back in the day, we were hacking websites privately, perhaps even illegally. Like I was one of the guys that found a vulnerability in Yahoo in 1999, right? It led to me a job. It was probably illegal for me to do it. And they took pity and gave me a job. So
I hope you didn't get sued, right?
Yeah, I could get sued. They could call the FBI. It's not going to be a good day. And now you got a million systems that you can test with impunity and practice and get good and show how good you are. It's phenomenal. I think it's great.
I should send some bills to some of these companies I gave vulnerabilities to, right? Because at the time we didn't get paid, right?
Yeah, I mean, the only way to get good at Absec at the time was to risk, going to jail.
I know, but I remember buying Hacking Exposed, man, and going, "Oh, let me try this out," right?
Let's see. How there's no other way to get access to these systems. It's not like I could go down to go online and go buy a copy of Yahoo Mail to install it myself. It was just not going to happen.
Exactly. So on a topic, changing gears to cloud providers, right? So now we're seeing a big shift, right, to the cloud providers, right? And it's really maturing, right? So if you look at the evolution of AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, and even some of the other big players who took a while to get to, but they're getting into, right? We're moving beyond just compute, right? We're moving beyond, the whole thing, and they, I'm a big fan of Worldly Maps. I don't know if you know what Worldly Map is, right? Well, then you have to definitely check it out. I'll send the link, right? But it's all about the commoditization of things, how things evolve, from left to right, from custom build all the way to commodity, right? And AWS has been doing that, right? They've been commoditizing first compute, then databases, etc. So they're now getting to the point where, although they are crazy complex, right? And I think they're starting to suffer a little bit by the Microsoft complexity problem, where it has a way to secure it, except by very few people can freaking do it, right? You do have an advantage that they control the ecosystem, right? And if you see that some of the interesting security developments that you have and some of the security innovations are starting to come from there, right? So as more and more companies go into, for example, AWS or Azure or Google Cloud, etc., right? Is almost like the investment in security that happens in those companies going to be able to make massive differences, right, into the environment. And I feel at the moment the commercials haven't aligned, but some of the questions that you ask, for example, like what's your threat landscape, those companies could answer if they wanted quite quickly.
I think there's a couple of things going on there. I don't think, I have a copy of the internet, so to speak. I don't see any proof that anybody moved to the cloud. I see companies did the cloud also. Yeah. I think they stand up brand new systems and leave the legacy where it's at, and they just add to the overall environment. That's generally what I see, because very little legacy stuff gets decommissioned anyway. Then what I see happening is, because of all the efficiencies and the benefits of the cloud, you deploy great big complex systems that do amazing things in the cloud. But over time, the cloud gets very expensive, and then there's a lock-in. And right when there's a lock-in, when you can't move your environment, let's say between AWS and Azure, then Amazon has less of an incentive to continue doing security for the benefit of all, because they know you can't move. There is no business incentive. Yep. And this is where technology tends to swing back and forth. Before it was all on-prem, we all do the infrastructure ourselves. Then we move, to like mainframe style cloud systems. and then we move back. The only question is when. At some point in time, the price of Amazon, Azure, App Engine, or whatever, it'll be so complex, so hard to manage, so antiquated. The next greatest thing will be do it yourself with these brand new Sun computers or whatever whatever the thing is today, and it'll shift back the other direction. And then we'll be doing a very complex migration away from the cloud to doing it yourself, where it's better, faster, cheaper. I mean, right now, I don't know where you are, but right now I just got fiber to the house. I got gig to the house. And so bandwidth and computing will come way down, where we don't need the cloud providers to do crazy scale for what we need. Yeah. How long will it take to get there? Another decade, perhaps 2. I don't know. But we're going to do some cool things in the meantime, whatever systems we run on.
But also gives you the ability, for example, to have copies of the internet, right? In ways that it's much cheaper than you could.
Well, and here's how it's architected, because it's not quite that way. We process a few hundred terabytes of data per month. We have every big data and compute problem there is: bandwidth, CPU, memory, and disk. 90% of our data is in a co-location facility that we host in Texas. Only 10% of what we do is on Amazon, because it would be cost prohibitive for us to put everything there in terms of storage and processing time, because we don't need fast access to the entire internet. We just need fast access to the 10 or so % that we're interested in today. So we tend to use Amazon as a proxy instance, and maybe you might call it some kind of a hybrid environment. That's how we do it.
Yeah, and I think that's the future, right? You get the best of both worlds, right?
It's whatever the technology and the price gives us today. If Amazon drops their prices tomorrow, we put it all there. If they raise it up, we'll pull it all back and we'll do it ourselves. So I think that's where, InfoSec or technologists in general, we have to be adaptable. We have to be able to learn quickly, adjust to a changing world and a changing environment. That ends up being who wins and who loses in this world.
Cool. Well, I'm kind of running out of the questions I had here. So any topics that you want to cover?
Oh, we covered a lot. Let's see. We covered, I'll give you one. We'll end on how about we end on a very contentious one?
Go for it.
Okay. Let's say you draw a concentric circle. It's too bad we should have set this up a little bit differently. We could have done like a little scribble on Zoom here. Let's say you have a circle representing all the vulnerabilities that are found by DAST, right?
Yeah.
Okay. One big bubble, all DAST phones, and let's say you had one little bubble representing all the vulnerabilities that are found and exploited by attackers.
Yeah.
What would the relative size be? Best you can tell, relative size be the overlap. Would you say most of the vulnerabilities that the attackers find, at least in websites, are found by DAST? Probably not all, probably not none, but somewhere in between. What would you put that?
I think you have the big circle.
Yeah.
I think you have the smaller circle.
Yeah.
And I'll probably say about 20% touching.
Okay.
Right? 30% touching in the bigger circle. So you have 70% not discovered, 30% discovered by the attackers.
Okay. There's no wrong answers here. This is pure hypothetical because no one has the data anyway. Yeah. Okay. So 70% of the 70% of the vulnerabilities that attackers find, DAST does not find. That's what you're saying, right? Okay, yeah. Great. Now let's do the same experiment for static analysis, okay?
Yeah.
But we're going to compare it to DAST. In your experience, if you find all the vulnerabilities that static analysis finds and all the vulns that DAST finds, what's the overlap?
Oh yeah, well the ones where they get both, right? I think that the problem there, right, is I feel raw ones I would probably add like the 10%, 20% overlap.
Well, let's say it's all cleaned up. It's all valid vulns.
Well, on even on both sides.
Yeah,
right?
on both sides. Not raw false positives generated nonsense, just vulns.
Yeah, I still would put that on a 20-30% max, right? Overlap, right? On those. And I'm being generous, a little bit here.
Fair enough. And my answer is not terribly different than yours. So here's the thing. We find vulnerabilities in websites, with DAST, because we want to find and fix the vulnerabilities that the attackers will find and exploit. But then we want to fix them earlier in the software development lifecycle. So then we say use static analysis for that. Then at the same breath, we go, but of all the vulns the static analysis finds, only 20% of those are going to be found by DAST. You see how this works. It's a really weird world. Now, one last question. The attacker bubble, of all the vulnerabilities that the remote attacker finds and exploits, what percentage of them, where do you put the circle for static analysis?
Well, the attacker is finding.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it would be even smaller, right? Like 5%, right? On that.
Okay,
right?
so here's where it gets contentious. Why do we do static analysis?
Yeah, but
They conceptually.
I would say you do static analysis because I'm raising the bar of security.
How?
Right? Because so my approach to static analysis is to codify the behaviors that I want the developers to do. So
it's not about finding vulns. It's
not just about finding vulns.
There we go.
Right? It's about a lot more than that, right? And so it's about, it's actually about enforcing coding standards, right? And your coding standards, security should be one element of it. And I actually think one of the biggest gaps that the security teams never bought it and the security vendors never bought it is that they should have always said, we are not just a security scanner, we are a code quality. But that would force a lot of much more difficult questions in terms of the visibility and the accuracy of the results.
So it seems to me that we named this tool badly. I guess it's called static analysis software testing. It's not meant to say find vulnerabilities, but that means finding a vulnerability should be a byproduct. Maybe not even something that it does. It should just be checking for, did you code the code correctly in this way? It shouldn't even find vulnerabilities because the vulnerabilities, as we know, don't matter. It's not finding the right ones anyway.
Yeah. But this is my frustration, man. My frustration was when I did the O2 platform, right? If you remember that thing, right? What I was doing is I was connecting the world, right? So I would connect a finding from a DAST all the way to the SAS. And I would actually use the analysis that I had to reverse engineer the application, to create models of how the application actually work, and then use the outside as a validation. And I would argue that if that thing cannot be exploited in this particular way, then why do I care? And the irony is that you should also connect that. One of the most coolest things I did was I was able to bring back data, like real life data, right, from logs, and then actually see which ones were even being hit, which ones were even be usable, which ones can even be discovered, right, by an attacker because of that. So just for reference, the I asked guys, which tend to be also quite, sort of controversial on these ones, right? They do have an interesting edge, right? Because they instrument the app in real time, so they see more traffic. But sure. The thing I would say with static analysis is static analysis was the first industry I've seen that actually creates an object model of the software. But they basically throw it all the way by trying just to map some vulnerabilities, where actually, almost like you said, the vulnerabilities should be a side effect of understanding how the thing works.
So that's where I got to with static analysis. And I think more than anything, that's why those vulnerabilities don't get fixed. Because while they might technically be a vulnerability, they also don't matter. They'll never get found and they'll never get exploited.
Absolutely. I agree with you, man. Look, it's quite interesting. It's only when you're in a position of responsibility that you suddenly start to argue, I'm not going to fix that. And unless you can prove to me why is that exploitable, unless you can prove to me, actually, you're going to find this funny. Petra, which actually on a call for my team, they found slow Loris, right, in one of our solutions. Remember that good old chestnut?
Yes.
And my challenge to them was saying, show me this exploitable, right? Yeah, I can see that problem over here, but that's one component of multiple components. So if you cannot exploit it from the outside world, actually, why bother, right? Not why bother. Then what it raises is the problem of how come we're freaking running insecure versions of an OS, right? So I'm more worried about that, right? Mm-hmm. But then it became the canary of that. Now, if the security tool who did that gave me a great object model and a graph of the dependencies, how everything fit together, right? And actually, and yes, again, show me the implications of the actual stuff that's going on, those security tools will be a lot more valuable, right?
Exactly right.
Sorry?
Yeah, exactly right.
For a while, I remember started saying that if a security tool is not being funded by the developers and by the engineers and by the operations, something's wrong. Because if they cannot get value from it, right? I remember once, I think was CrowdStrike, and another one was another security tool we had. We were showing the IT guys what we can do, or even Darktrace, right? And they were like, bloody hell, man, can I use that to detect the next time a dude calls me and say that his computer is not online? And I can say, you are, man, because I can see your traffic, right? So but we don't go there in security, right?
We were talking about bug bounty a moment ago. Maybe just a last topic here. One of the companies that I worked with, not for anything, they taught me a really interesting trick. You know, they had a set budget annually or every quarter for paying out bug bounties in the software.
Yeah.
Might have been 100,000, 200,000, whatever it was, right?
Yeah.
But whatever bounty money went unclaimed, it got distributed to the development team.
Yeah. No, I've heard about that, right?
It changed the environment completely.
Yeah. No, I've heard that, right? It's actually quite interesting, right? Yeah. Because it's it is again changed the economic model, right? Reward for not writing vulnerabilities, right?
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, there's lots of innovation in the space. Just one other one that comes to mind is a lot of times these static analysis tools will find vulnerabilities. They'll do a checkout from the source code repository and they'll find a vulnerability in it. What they also should have knowledge is what developer put the vulnerability there and when in the first place, when it was first appeared. I think we actually should be able to do software security performance reviews on a developer by developer basis. Because you might have found this in your organizations. We teach everybody cross-site scripting, every developer cross-site scripting, but it might be just two of them in the whole team that have a cross-site scripting problem. We just don't know who they are. We know from being having backgrounds in software that there's different levels of productivity amongst developers. I think in terms of software vulnerabilities, there might be a Pareto principle there too. 80% of the vulns might be produced by 20% of developers. We just don't know their names. And
because what you need is the organizational graph.
Yeah.
Right? So again, so what you're saying is that there's this organizational graph, right? And by the way, we're building this on top of Jira, right? Which is quite interesting. If you see some of the stuff we're doing, in fact, if you want to say a really cool thing, check out the session we did on Monday on scaling SOC 2, right? Using Jira. But I know I've invested quite a lot in my teams on taking the data from Jira, pumping it to Elasticsearch, and then creating like a gigantic schema. But what we're doing is kind of that, right? Is to get to the point where every one of those items is a node in the graph. And then basically every tool gives you a couple of more nodes, a couple more visibility into that node. The problem is the tragedy of the commons. Unless you have the graph in the first place, it's too expensive for everybody to be creating it.
Yeah.
Right? In fact, I once sit down with a bug bounty company actually that I was using, and I was telling them, actually, I did a worldly map for them. And I said, look, guys, at the moment, you just give me lots of problems, right? You tell me, I was having that conversation similar to what you were saying, right? You tell me about a lot of stuff that maybe nobody else is going to find. But now what you don't tell me is who the hell can fix it. So actually, you guys gave me an object model and actually tell me, and if you spend the time yourselves to figure out who the hell is going to fix this in my organization, I'll even pay you more because that knowledge will be so valuable, right? Yeah. Because the freaking thing, man, the thing nobody tells you is in the company, even if you do the mappings, the freaking thing changes, right? Every 3 weeks, right? And even the company doesn't know that, right? Even if you go to somebody and you show your organizational structure, after a while you present another one, they're going, that's wrong. I was like, no, this is right because those guys reorganize and that thing changed and the business had this other priority, right? So almost situational awareness of how the business works, right? Is, look, you guys, you should be going, look, my recommendation to you is start going a couple levels deep and start putting data in a graph database. So not only you sell almost the attack surface, but you sell who is there, like who owns that thing, right? Up to the company and then eventually the developer and eventually the business owner, right?
That would, if I could figure out a way to do that, that'd be just wonderful.
Yeah.
But I think what we're showing to anybody who ends up watching this is there's lots of innovation, lots of problems to solve, lots of places to add value. There's no shortage of it. Jump in, pick a spot.
Yeah. And it's a great industry, right? I think what's cool about this is that and look, I think if anybody's joining today, if you are privileged enough to be 20 years later, right, and still be passionate about what you do, and actually, look, I think, look, you can look back and say you made the world a better place, right? Like I'll say that too, right? I say, look, I can definitely go to bed saying, you know, there's people that we helped, right, by making things secure. That if we hadn't done what we did, right, more things would be bad, right? And it's a great industry to be. And I think the reality is we definitely have another 10 and 20 years ahead of us, right, at the same level of innovation and the same level of passion. And it's a great place to be, right?
I think that's a really good place to leave the discussion. You know, I've been in the industry now 20 years, and you know, all of my life I've known the internet, and I've said this many times. I consider the internet probably the single greatest invention we'll see in our lifetime. Yeah. If you think about it, it's where we shop, it's where we learn, it's where we play, it's where we get to have conversations like this. It's a place where we share the most intimate moments. I mean, what you type into that little search box and search the internet, you would never tell your spouse. I mean, it's like, you know, that sort of thing is important. It connects 2 billion people, and you and I and those listening, those that care, we get the privilege and the opportunity to help protect such a thing. And I think that's a good way to spend someone's life.
Great way to end it, man. Thanks for your time. It's
Thank you very
pleasure
much,
to see you again. And I'll catch you later.
Thanks, Dinis.